how to use Arteza watercolor pencils. That's what we're going to be looking at in this video. I've got a beginner's tutorial for you. We're going to be painting some toadstools step by step. Welcome back to my channel. If we have not met before, my name is Michelle, and on this channel you'll find all things watercolor and a little bit of mixed media too. If you click the bell icon, you can get notified every time I have a new video for you. I make one free video a week here on YouTube on a Thursday, with extra content on Saturdays for my Patreon subscribers. So I have been sent these Arteza watercolor pencils. You can see they're still in the packet. I haven't unwrapped them yet. So to give you a full disclosure, I have been sent these pencils for no money, lucky me. But I was not paid to make this video, and this video is not sponsored by Arteza. Having said that, you can follow along with this tutorial with any brand of watercolor pencils that you already own. But if you are interested in Arteza, there are links in the description to the products that I'm using. They're a very good price actually. And you can also get a discount code in the description. Now it is time limited, but if you're watching this video within just a few weeks of it being uploaded, you'll be able to go into the video description and get that discount code. So if this is your first time watching one of my videos, you may not know that I have been teaching watercolor painting and watercolor pencils in the real world for getting on for 20 years now. So I know exactly what beginners do to go wrong. And it's amazing when you can teach multiple classes, even in different countries I've taught, and you see the same mistakes over and over again. I think because when you first grab a new material, it's instinctive to use it in a certain way, and that's not always the best way that you'll get the best results from it. So what I'm going to do before I go through the tutorial with you is I'm just going to show you a couple of things that I see beginners do wrong again and again with watercolor pencils. So we'll go through those first of all. I think just getting those first techniques will really help you to get a better result from your watercolor pencils. And then I'm going to take you step by step through a tutorial. We're going to paint some toadstools. Now, if you're a member of my Patreon, I am going to put the photograph that I used up as one of your copyright-free photos on Saturday. So if you're in Patreon, that's something that you can grab as well. Otherwise, you can just use the techniques in this video and follow along. So the first way that I see beginners go wrong with watercolor pencils is they sketch everything, they put all of their colours on, they do the full drawing in the watercolor pencils and then add water on top, and everything runs into everything else. So I'm going to do a little sample piece for you and show you what that looks like, and then show you a better way of working. So I've got a scrap of watercolor paper here, and looking at this idea of working in layers rather than putting all the water on in one go. So let's just do some sketching here. I'm just rubbing the side of the pencil. Now the other things I've got on hand, I've got some water jars on hand. I have got some paper towel to dry my brush on when I need to. So this is a size 10 and it's by Jackman's. Now it says sable on it, but it's not sable. I don't use real hair brushes because I am vegan. So although it says number 10, I only discovered recently, and this is something I didn't know, that sizes across brush brands are not all the same. So in other words, a 10 in one brand is not the same as a 10 in the other, which of course is hugely annoying when people are asking me what size brush to get. So you can see you'll get some little gaps where the pencil is skimming across the top of the paper, which is why if you're working in standard colour pencils you should use cartridge paper because it's smoother. But what's going to happen is when we put water on, that's all going to fill in those little gaps, so that's going to be fine. So you'll see that I'm applying it a little bit on the side and trying to be quite even with it, rather than sort of, if you start scribbling like this, sometimes what happens is you don't entirely get rid of those marks. So we're going to keep it smooth. Now let's pick another colour. Let's go for this red, and let's just make some patterns on here. So let's just imagine we were, drawing something with a pattern, a piece of pottery or a piece of fabric. Might be part of a larger painting, and we're doing the whole thing first. So this is one option. Now what's going to happen when I apply water is that this is going to blend. So you can still see the marks a little bit at the moment, but you can see that the more I work into that, the more they're going to start disappearing. Now they won't always disappear altogether, depends on the brand, but it's not ideal, is it? Because we had those lovely bright red marks and now they've disappeared, because what we should have done is done the yellow layer first. So I'm going to show you now the alternative way of doing it. So let's apply the yellow again. I'm going to work this up. So I'm going to put plenty on so that we get that lovely bright colour. It's a very pretty colour, isn't it? What's it called? Let's have a look. Tuscan Sun. Looks very much like a cadmium yellow deep, doesn't it? So we're going to put the yellow on again, but this time we're going to wet it before adding the red. So here we are. I'm going to smooth that out. And then I'm going to go in with the red, and I'm not even going to bother doing anything to it. I'm just going to go straight onto wet paper. Now what happens when you draw on wet paper like this is the watercolour pencil releases more pigment as well. So it's actually releasing more pigment than it did the first time I was drawing on dry paper. Of course I could, if I wanted to, go in and soften those red marks as much as I wanted to, or put a layer of something else over. But can you see how this is how you should be working in layers, rather than doing your entire drawing in watercolour pencils and then chucking water on top, because all that will happen is the whole lot will just run in together. You'll just end up with a few scruffy marks. So it's a bit like making a cake. If you were making a chocolate cake with cream in the middle, you would make the sponge and you would let that cool down, and then you'd add the cream, and then you'd let that cool down, and then you might put melted chocolate over the top and place it in the fridge. It's the same with watercolour. You wouldn't put all of those ingredients, and dump them in a bowl and put them in the oven. It would just make a big mess. So the same with watercolour and watercolour pencils. You want to be working in layers and adding things a little bit at a time, and that's what we're going to do with our tutorial today. Now another area that beginners get into trouble with is blending out soft edges. So they often end up with lots of hard edges where they didn't really want them because they don't understand the correct way of applying the water. So what I'm going to do now is show you a really easy trick for getting soft, blended, faded edges. So let's look at blending now. So I've drawn 2 circles and I've put some watercolour pencil around the outside. So the idea is that this would be an object in the middle, and perhaps this would be some shadow fading out, or it could be the centre of a flower, and we could be fading out our colour from there. So what people normally do is they go in like this and they start working around, and we're just blending the colour now. This colour is called Mykonos Blue. It's really pretty, isn't it? So I'm going to take that round like that and come around with the water. Now, although it looks a pretty colour and it's wetting nicely, we are ending up with this kind of this hard edge here, aren't we? It's not fading out neatly. We've got these quite crisp edges around the outside. There may be times when that's appropriate, but I'm going to show you now what to do in order to blend that. Now you could just drag a wet paintbrush around the outside. That's quite a difficult blending technique though, so I'm going to show you an easier way. So we've got this one here. What colour is this? This is turquoise. Okay, lovely. So I'm going to clean my brush. I'm going to go into some water that I know is completely clean now. I've got 2 jars on the side as always. And I'm going to put some clean water on, but I'm going to start way out from where the pencil is. And what I'm doing this time is working in. So rather than dragging the colour outwards, and you'll always get some colour going right to the edge of the area that you're dragging outwards to, and you'll always end up with some form of hard edge. What we're doing this time is we're taking the water in. There we go. And we're still going to manipulate and wet, but we've taken the water in from the outside. So I'm going to let it dry out. Now when you're doing techniques like this, it's important that you don't have too much water. You want enough water that the paint flows, the pencil is wet nicely, but you absolutely don't want puddles, because then you'll get no control at all. So what I'm doing now is just working in so that I get that nice crisp edge towards the centre there, and just blending that out as much as I want to. And the reason I took the water quite a way out is because it's really easy when you do this to go off the edge of the water. So you want to take the water out at least double, possibly 3 or 4 times further than you actually want that colour to bleed. And there we are, just taking that round, and being careful not to take the paintbrush all the way up to the edge. So what we've done this time is we've got a nice blended effect, and we've avoided a really hard edge like we've got here. I mean, it's a beautiful colour, this blue, but look at this hard edge here, and we've avoided that completely with the turquoise by taking the water to the outside and working in and then manipulating the colour a little bit, rather than, as we did with this one, taking the water and working out. So if you've got an area with watercolour pencils that you want to blend, you want to be working outside in rather than inside and pushing the pigment outwards. At this point, if you're enjoying this video, could I ask you for a quick favour, please? Could you possibly click the like button? YouTube rewards channels with high audience interaction, so if you like, share, subscribe, or even leave me a comment, YouTube will push this video out to more people and I get to teach more people how to paint with watercolours. So whatever you're doing with your watercolour pencils, you're going to need to start with an outline drawing. There are options here, so you can work in graphite, you can also work in watercolour pencil. I'm going to explain to you what I'm doing and the reasons for that so that you can choose for yourself which of those is the best options for yourself and for your subject. So I've completed my graphite drawing and I'm going to make a confession here. I have traced this one. Now, you will rarely see me trace anything on this channel. I'm a very big advocate of drawing, freehand drawing. I think it's really, really an important skill to learn, but I did use traced down paper today. So why did I trace today? The simple fact is that I moved house 2 days ago and I'm really, really short of filming time at the moment. So you might have seen the beginning of the video and seen the background. You think, well, you're still in the same studio. And I'm actually coming back here to work at the moment. So what I'm doing is I'm almost between two houses. So I've moved into one house, but I still have access to the old house and I'm still using the studio. Not least of all because the broadband hasn't been swapped over yet. So and I've already maxed out the. It took me literally a day and a half to max out the data on my phone. So no YouTube for me in the evenings. I'm just going to have to read books now. So reading quite a good Stephen King book actually. So yes, it is absolutely fine to trace if you want to. You know, if you're in my Patreon, you get this photograph and you want to trace and do this tutorial. You know, you can't be learning 20 things at once. If you just want to have a go with the watercolor pencils, I'm not going to tell you it's wrong to trace the image. However, what I will say is that long term, learning to draw is so important, and that drawing and painting are not separate skills. You need to be able to do one to be good at the other, because at the end of the day, painting is just drawing with a brush. I have used the graphite here, but you could equally use the watercolor pencils. So I've opened them up. Let's have a look at some of the colors that might be appropriate for doing this drawing. So here's the tin, and it's got this nice thing on the lid here that's a colour code that's going to tell you what all your colours are. So that's really handy as well. What I would suggest when you get a new set of pencils like this as well is to make yourself an actual chart where you actually swatch them on a piece of paper. If you feel like doing something artistic and you're just not feeling it, you can't think what to do, what subject to paint, then making a colour chart is a lovely way to spend the time. There's no pressure and it's so nice seeing all those pretty colours, because lovely as this colour chart is on the lid, it won't be as good as making your own swatches, which is something you really should do. Now within the tin itself, we've got 3 layers of pencils. Now they look really beautiful, don't they, in this sort of these colour codes like this, but actually we've got 3 layers here. Actually what I will do is I will rearrange these so that all the greens are together, all the yellows are together, because for me I just find it really helpful to see the same colours together. So I can see why they put them like this, because it looks really pretty, but I would consider, you know, rearranging them so you've got similar colours together. It's much easier to know which blue you want if you can see all of your blues in one go. But luckily there's no difference between any of these layers. They can easily be rearranged exactly in the order that you want them. Now if I was doing this sketch and I was doing it directly in watercolour pencil, then I probably would choose a neutral. So this is a lovely light grey here. Has it got the name on it? Smoke grey. That's a really nice colour, isn't it? So you just want something light that's not going to show up too much. You don't want to be sketching in that bright red or something, because it will blend into your colours. So if you want to sketch in the watercolour pencils, then you can use those, or a light brown, something like that. I sometimes on this channel, I sometimes sort of mentioned getting rid of graphite pencil marks, and people have said, oh well, I do all my sketching in watercolour pencils. For me, I do prefer sketching in graphite, but that's not saying there's anything wrong with sketching in watercolour pencils. You do get somewhat of a fluffy line when you sketch on watercolour paper, either with graphite pencils or with watercolour pencils. So for me, if I'm doing a really detailed botanical subject, I would sometimes prefer to use a very fine graphite pencil, something like an HB, very lightly, because I know that I'll get minimal smudging from that and I'll get really crisp, clean edges. However, if you're doing something that's a bit looser, a landscape, something like that, absolutely nothing wrong with going in with the watercolour pencils directly if that's what you prefer doing. So now we're going to start applying our watercolour pencils. I'm going to show you how to apply several colours at once, and we're going to work on a light wash for the background. Now this won't be the end of the background, this is just the first layer. So let's start our painting and choose our colours. Now this is a nice square photograph, and actually I think it would look lovely as a square picture, but I didn't have, as I said, I'm in the middle of moving house, I didn't have a square board stretched. So I've got this on a landscape. You know, equally it could go on portrait. It's a good thing about a subject like this, because the background's quite sketchy, you know, you could make that finish any shape that you want. You could even, as I may do today, make this into more of a vignette so that the colour, rather than going right to the edges of your board, stops in a nice halo effect round. Now I've done videos previously on this channel. I've got a video I'll link to in the cards up above, which is about how to make a vignette in watercolour. Several methods there, but we're going to do it today in the watercolour pencils. And what I want to do is try out some of these colours to see which ones I think are the best. Now I'm going to do the background in stages, so I want to start with a fairly sort of light neutral colour. I'm thinking something, you know, like a light brown, almost like what would be raw umber in watercolour painting. So this looks quite a nice colour, doesn't it? Burnt ochre it's called, so let's try that one out. We'll just swatch this. When you're choosing your colours, always want to swatch them, because you really can't tell what colours things are until you see them on the paper, and in the case of mediums like this that need wetting, until you see how they look when they're wet. So that's quite nice, isn't it? But I don't want just one colour in the background, I think I'll have some others as well. So let's choose a slightly warmer colour, one up from yellow ochre. Honey, that seems a nice colour. That's lovely, isn't it? It's almost a mustard colour, so that's kind of a match for some of these areas too. So that's nice. I might put some green in the background as well. I'm going to keep the greens quite sort of quite muted, so that they are set aside from the bright greens of the grass we're going to have in the foreground. I'm very attracted to this one actually, which is called pear green. It's quite a yellow green, so let's have a look at this one. There is the hint in the photograph of a tree trunk at the back, but I'm not going to put that in mine. I just want to have a nice background behind my toadstools. So let's have a look at that one. Yeah, really happy with that. I think those colours will look lovely. So what I'm going to do now is to put them on. I don't want to go too dark initially with the background. Remember, working light to dark so that everything builds up and we have options of going dark on top. So what I'm going to do is sketch the background and start adding water once that background's sketched. So I've got my colours next to me, and I'm going to start just laying these in. Again, you know, sketching quite lightly and not pressing too hard, because you can end up leaving little dents. And I'm just going to sort of randomly fill these areas in. When you're going two sides of something, so I'm going on one side of the toadstool here and then going across to the other side, so that it looks as if things just carry on behind, even if they're quite blurred and you can't quite see what they are. It's nice to carry on with the same colour. So I'm going to take that across there, and what that will do then is it'll mean that you get the impression that there are objects behind the front objects. And then now and again I'm just going to change colours and fill in like this. This is a slightly darker colour, so again I'm not going to go too dark with it. And I'm going to go round some of these large leaves and things I've got in the foreground, and then that will give me options so that I can sort of get stronger colour there if I want to, and I won't be layering on top of other colours. So I'm going to take this down like this. So you want to stop just short of the edges that you've drawn of those objects, because we can push the pigment forward with the brush and get a nice smooth edge, whereas otherwise you can end up just with very scruffy edges if you go too close to your objects initially. So I'm going to take these in like this, and also we're going to get some green in there, and this will be a lovely contrast to the red. So red and green are opposite colours, so they're always going to play off nicely against each other. I'm going to fill this in here. Again, trying to get the impression that there are actually objects here rather than just sort of scribbling randomly. And you start to see actually how going across like this has helped that. I can also layer colours on top of each other. So I can layer the green on top of the yellow, and that means that that area will blend nicely into the other area. Now you can see in all my house moving and sorting out shenanigans, I've actually scratched the board here. Can you see how you're getting a little bit of an effect on there? To be honest, unless it's in the middle of a sky or somebody's forehead, it doesn't matter too much. So it is important to be careful with your boards, but I've got boxes and things all over the place at the moment. I'll probably add more of the brown low down because that would give the impression of earth, and probably more the green and the yellow higher up, particularly the green at the top, because that'll give the impression that we've got some earthy things going on here, some dirt and some leaves, and then we've got the greenery going up behind. I'm going to get on now and finish all of that sketching, and then we'll wet that area. So you can see I've nearly finished sketching the background colours in, and I feel actually as I go towards the top here, I want to get some blue in behind. It's not in the original picture, but whenever should that stop us? I don't know. So I'm going to go in with this colour, Robin Egg Blue it's called. I think it's going to be a really nice colour for the sky, and I'm just sketching it across. Now something you want to do with landscapes is, and this is, I know it's a still life really, but it's also in a landscape. You're trying to get the impression that you've got land behind, so you always want to be going for that horizontal effect. I'm actually going to bring the sky down and just overlap it with the green here, because we're not going for specific things in the background, we're going for this kind of blended effect. We'll take that up like that, just break that edge up a little bit, and we're going to try and, I've taken it down to the bottom here, but we're going to try and get like a vignette effect on three sides. And you can see I haven't gone too close to the actual toadstools themselves, and if you see when I drew them, when I traced around, I made sure to get those little bumps at the top, because those little white bits that stick out. So I'm going to go a little bit more green in here, and you can see that I've stuck to the same colours, but I haven't I haven't gone into 20 different colours, because you'll find that your picture really won't hang together if you use, although we've got these lovely pencils and there's so many different colours to choose from, we want to just use a few within a picture, and then we can do a different picture and use a few others. So that way you get this almost limited palette effect. So I'm going to get my brush now and start working in. I'm actually going to pick up a flat brush and take some water around the outside as I go. There's no point me wetting all of this, because by the time I have gone round here and round here, I get round here, it'll be dry this side. So I'm going to sort of start in the middle, and I'll get a flat brush to add the water as I need to as we go around the edge. I'm going to start in the middle here at the base and start working these colours together. So what I'm looking at doing now is sharpening up those edges of the objects that we're going round and blending all of these together. You don't want to over blend these areas, because otherwise if you've got green and brown and you just mix, all you'll do is you'll end up with one colour. So I'm going to do this, and I can dip in and clean my brush whenever I need to. So you can see I'm starting here at the lighter of the colours, the yellow, coming down into the brown, but not dragging my paintbrush back over that whole area. So again, I'm going to start up here, making little circular motions with my brush, because that will help the colour to release. And you can see we've got these nice lights and mid-tones. I don't want to go too dark at this point. Now it may be towards the end that I go in again and go darker, particularly where I've got light things like the mushroom stems. And this is just a natural part of painting, that as you get towards the end you adjust the tonal contrast. But at this point I just want to go in and get those light mid-tones, because I've got the option then of going darker, but it's quite hard with watercolours to go lighter and to lift paint off. So we're going to start light and then we'll work up. Just leaving those areas where we've got leaves and grasses so that we can have them nice and sharp later on. I may also take some grass on top of the background. So this is going to apply the water evenly in a nice wide stripe around the edge here, which means that we can get that nice blended effect. You can see it's starting to soften the water there, but I don't want to accidentally push that paint right out to the edges. So I'm going to come in now with my first brush, coming back into the middle here. If you find that you pick up too much paint and there's a lot of, say, brown on your paintbrush, just rinse your brush now and again, and that just stops, the whole lot becoming muddy, and means that you reserve those colours. Go in here, keep going round. Now I'm just going to carry on Do exactly the same with the rest of the painting. So as I come up to this area here, you can see I'm going around methodically, went to the middle and now I'm going around the edge, because what we can do now is take that water further up. As I go around the toadstool tops, I'm going to be very careful to go around those little bumps with the point of my brush. So when you're painting like this, make sure that you can see the point of your brush. If that means that you have to turn your board round, then that's fine. You never want to be sort of prodding at things from the wrong side so you can't see the tip of your brush. You know, you can't possibly see how you're painting if you can't see the end of the brush. So again, going up here and working into that blue-green. I don't want to spread this green right the way through the blue, so I'm going to stop there, and what I'll do is I'll take the water and come this way so that I don't end up taking that green across all of the blue at the top. So I'm going to get on now and complete painting the background. So now we're going to start on the toadstools themselves, and we're going to start working light to dark. Now I'm going to be very careful to leave the red right until the end, and there's a very good reason for that, and that's because red watercolours and watercolour pencils tend to bleed more than any other colour. So any colour that's got red in, that includes things like purple, they're going to bleed. And of course, if the colour's very strong, you paint up to the edge of it, you've got a good chance of that edge not staying put. So I'm going to leave the red right until the end of the picture. Won't it be lovely to put it in at the end and get all of that drama? Now this is the problem that some people have when they first start watercolour painting, is they want to go for the bright colours first, and it can be quite disastrous. So if you're ever uncertain of what order to do things in, you'll never go wrong by working light to dark. So what we're going to do now is work on those really light, subtle, shadowy areas on the toadstools, and particularly on the stems of the toadstools. So that's my background done. Really pleased with those colours, looking lovely and bright. Next I want to do the underneath layer of the mushroom colour, you know, the off-white colour. Although I've got 72 colours here, of course there are millions of colours in the real world, in the natural world. So I'm actually going to blend two colours together to get the exact colour I want. Rather than blend them on the paper, I'm actually going to do a technique whereby we use a scrap of paper almost as a painting palette. So what I'm going to do here is to make a swatch of colour, and then I'm going to paint from it. So let's layer one colour and then we'll layer another. So I've got camel here, and I think this is elephant grey, because I'm looking for that colour that's very pale and between brown and grey. Now this doesn't look pale, but I'm going to water it down. So what I'm going to do now is I've almost made myself like a little paint palette here. So I'm going to agitate this and then get some colour. Now it's looking almost a tiny bit greenish there. So what I'm going to do is add some pink to it. So if you've ever got something that's too green, you can just, let's put a bit on the side there. Wow, that's a lovely colour, isn't it? That's called flamingo pink. You can just mix a little bit of pink in, and what will happen is that'll just knock the green out of the mix. And so I'm going to go in and put a very faint layer across the whole of the top of the mushrooms. Do wait when doing this until your background is dry. Come down into the stem, and when I get down to the stem, I'm going to actually use the watercolour pencil to add a few of these darker details in. So this colour is smoke grey, and I'm going to start getting some of these areas here. So working directly into the wet paint here. Good idea with areas that curve, such as stems like this, is to go a little darker down the sides. I'd actually like even more dark than that, so I'm going to go darker still. And this colour is cocoa brown, and you can see it releasing the pigment as it hits the water there. So I'm just layering these two colours into that first mix so that we start to get some structure. Also want to get a little bit of shadow here underneath the cap of the toadstool. Paper's starting to dry a little bit now, so I'll go in again in a second with my brush. Just smooth out some of those areas. And we'll put some more shading down here at the base of the mushroom too. If ever you're uncertain about shadows, remember that you just want to go in to the base of areas, things that recede, things that go behind other things, and just working in there and continuing to spread and smooth with the brush. Finally, I've got a really dark colour here. It's called dark chocolate brown. just to get some more of that contrast going on, getting that shadow in. Not putting any shadow on the cap of the mushroom here, because all I want is for those white dots to show, those off-white dots to show once we put the red on later on. So I'm going to get on now and do the exact same process for the other mushroom. At this point, I'm going to go back to the background. I'm going to put some lovely fresh green grass stems in. So let's add some grass, and I'm going to use this colour here, and it's called Spring Green. So I'm going to apply this much more heavily. So we've got some leaves in the front here as well, so not all of the white is grass. I'm going to actually go in much stronger with this because we're starting now to ramp up those colour contrasts, and I'm being careful not to lean in areas that I've already done. So again, taking this up into these grass areas, but being careful not to go right to the edge of them. We want to get the brush pushing the pigment to the edge of the areas rather than going fully up there with the watercolour pencil. In that way you'll get a much smoother line. Now going in with the brush and smoothing these out. So do make sure that your background is dry before you do these areas. And I may later on put more of this green directly onto the background, because I'll be going on top of other colours that will mute it a little bit. So it's nice to have a few of these grass stalks at the front that are going onto white paper, because they'll be our our foreground ones, they'll be our brightest ones. Filling in any white gaps. You want to avoid there being white gaps. Now of course when you sketch initially there'll be white gaps because of the bumps in the paper. So the idea with the brush is to smooth that out so that the pigment is pushed into all the little dips. So we get those nice, strong, bright grasses. Next we're going to choose some more colours, and we're going to add some leaf shapes to the background of our painting. So the leaf shapes look to me to be somewhat bright orange. They seem to be very autumny. So I'm going to use this pumpkin colour for some of these. We may also go into some red as well. So for this area here, for instance, we'll do part of it in pumpkin. And then let me see if I've got a nice brick colour. Blood orange, that's a nice sounding name, isn't it? There we are, that's a great colour. So this is going to be a different red to the red that we put on the caps of the toadstools, because we want more of an earthy red down here. Again, filling in these areas but not going quite to the edge, so that we've got these little white gaps, and we'll push the pigment out with the brush. So the colours are still looking quite soft and blended at the moment, but as we continue, what we'll do is we'll keep going and we'll ramp up the contrast. Now I have found on my YouTube channel that videos about watercolour pencils are really very popular, so I'm quite fascinated to know why that is. I think I have a theory that it's because beginners enjoy watercolour pencils because they're easier to control than paint, but you know, do let me know in the comments what you like about watercolour pencils. And also if you have any questions about them, or just if there are any types of tutorials that you want. I have done some tutorials on basic techniques. I'll link to one of those at the end. But interested as well to know what other sorts of things you want me to create with watercolour pencils for you. So happy with those shapes. They look really lovely, don't they? I might add a few more later on, but for now I'm going to leave it at that, and then we'll make those adjustments towards the end. So if you're anything like me, this is the bit that you've really been waiting for. I love the drama and I love the bright colours, so let's go ahead and put the red on our toadstools. So the colour I've got here is rose red. Rose would suggest a pinkish colour, but actually when you use it full strength it appears to be what I would almost call a blue red. In other words, a red that leans towards the blue end of the spectrum, rather than something like a brick red that tends towards the yellow-orange end of the spectrum. So this is what we want, this real strong colour. And I want a strong contrast between this sort of red and the other red that we've got down here, because that adds more interest to the picture. So what I'm going to do now is start filling in the red areas, and we're going to be working almost in a negative way, so that this underneath colour, which will read as very light, I didn't want it to be pure white, it is a little bit on the edges, which I think will be nice, but it will read as just a light colour. So I'm just going to lean on this here, and I'm going to start, you know, getting these shapes in. What I'm doing is I'm looking across. It's off camera so you can't see it, but I am actually looking across at the shapes of these little white areas. I'm sort of drawing them and then filling in. I did also just walk across in between shots and sharpen this pencil. You want to make sure when you want those real sharp edges, you want to make sure you've got a sharp point on your pencil. Now if you're a bit worried at the beginning, you know, by doing this freehand, you can of course draw if you want to, you know, there's nothing to stop you drawing every single little shape in here, but I'm just going to do them as I go along. Do keep looking however at your picture, because you'll notice that because we're looking across these objects, they're slightly foreshortened, and therefore the rounded shapes will be, generally speaking, not every one of course, but generally speaking, they'll be wider than they are high. And what that does is it flattens them down, stops them sort of looking unnatural, because if for something to be perfectly circular like this, you'd have to be looking at it from above. So if you do them too circular, it's going to make the perspective look wrong. So I'm just going to continue going round and filling in as much as I can with the colour. And once we've done that, then we'll go in with the brush. So I filled all the red in now. You can see it's still quite scruffy, but it's going to smooth out nicely when I add the water. Now, although the white spots look random, they actually do in places follow these curves around the top of the toadstool cap. So quite important to get that as well, because it'll help them to look more rounded. So again, I'm going to lean on here and start wetting, smoothing out all of those red areas so we get this nice bright red, blending everything across with the tip of my brush. So you can see I didn't take the watercolour pencil right up to the very edges of the white spots, although I did outline some of them with the pencil first. If you want a really sharp edge with watercolour pencils, or indeed with coloured pencils, what you want to do is sharpen your pencil and press quite hard. Be aware though that once you've pressed hard onto watercolour paper, you're not going to, or even cartridge paper, you're not really going to move that line later on. So make sure that it's where you want it, because you know once you've dented the paper, there's no return ticket from that. So I'm going to carry on now and keep going across and keep blending until I've gone right the way across both of the toadstool caps. Now our painting is almost finished, and at this point, as is the case with any painting that you're doing, you just want to have a final look over and see if any areas need strengthening, because at this point we're going to ramp up the tonal contrast so we get a really, really lovely, contrasty, bright, dramatic image. So I finished putting the water on the red parts, but the painting itself is not finished because we need to go in and sharpen everything up and add a few more elements and increase tonal contrast. So I can go into the background if I want to and add more grasses. Now, although we're going on top of other colour, let's do one here. You can see it will be quite easy for me to go in. So I'm just going to blend that there. So that's a possibility. But before I do that, I want to sharpen up and increase tonal contrast. Now, although the red mushroom caps are looking much better, they still lack sharpness and some colour strength in places. So what I'm going to do now is go back in. I've sharpened my pencil because obviously doing all that shading gets a bit blunt. So you want to resharpen. I'm going to go in now, really around the edges, and be very careful to sharpen up those edges. Now you want to make sure at this point that you're not just outlining the edge. So wherever you go along the edge, for instance, if I go along the edge here, I'll also shade into. I can re-wet if I need to, but equally I can go and dry as well if that works best. So I'm going to go in and sharpen all these areas up. There are also areas where you can see the outside of this little bump here is outlined in pencil, but most of them are not, and they're not showing up very well at all. So what I'll do there is I'll go back in behind with some more of the light green, and I'll just darken those areas. Now be aware that whenever I go back in with water, there's a danger of leaving a mark. So it may actually be best to go in with water around the whole of the outside again. I know it's time consuming, but it is the way of getting the best result. Generally it's best to go dark behind, but not always. Again, you know, look at this here. There's not a lot of tonal contrast. You've got a little bit of a pencil line, but there's not a lot of tonal contrast between one and the other. So what I can do is just go in behind and ramp up that contrast. You won't always want to go in behind. Sometimes you'll be going into the object that's in the front, but all the time looking at sharpening up and just making things a little bit stronger. Again, I can go in here and really sharpen up that edge. You always want to be avoiding looking like you're outlining things though. And the way to do that is to spread the colour across slightly and not just go down the edge in a narrow straight line. And I'm now going to just put the finishing touches on this picture, ramping up the contrast, and then I'll show you at the end. So here's my finished picture. If the light looks a little bit different, it's because this is actually the following morning that I finished this off, because it was getting a bit too dark. The evenings are drawing in here now in the UK, and I wanted to get this finished when I had some good light. So I've gone round, I've strengthened everything. I actually decided to put a few dark green grasses on top. So I use this colour here, which is the basil green. Now, when you get these colours, they're what I would call blunt sharpened. So they've been sharpened, but they've got a blunt end. So it really does give you an improved result if you sharpen them before you use them. And certainly when you're doing these last little bits, you want to really crisp up those edges. You want to work with a sharp pencil. I went across lots of areas and just strengthened the colour, adjusted things. The leaf shapes here, they're kind of abstract, aren't they? I haven't bothered to make them look sort of like real leaves. They could be anything really, but I kind of like the effect, and you know, lovely bright colours. So there's our finished Toadstools picture. Do let me know in the comments if you've used watercolour pencils before. Perhaps you're going to have a go now you've seen this tutorial. Do remember to look in the video description if you're interested in getting those links to the Arteza products that I've used today. Now, if you enjoyed this tutorial, you're going to love the tutorial that I made on basic watercolour pencil techniques. You can watch that one right now.